Hey, Ralph.
Hey, dude, how are you?
Good, man. How are you? I
I'm
uh
okay. I'm okay.
I feel like
Back.
this is kind of a peak COVID moment right now because here we are on a Zoom call and it would take me 2 minutes to drive to your house right now.
Well, yeah, we're trying to stay safe and we're trying to, do the right thing. Even when neighbors come over, we open the doors and wear masks and,
Oh, totally.
just because we don't know enough yet. And it's funny, Judy has been an RN for long enough that it was in the AIDS crisis in the 80s when they didn't call it, Reagan didn't call it AIDS for 3 years, but nobody knew. They didn't know how it was transmitted. And so it's the same kind of nervousness with a pandemic.
Right.
And that was a pandemic that you didn't know. Is it on your hands? Is it in the air? Is it
Right.
on the surface? All that. So yeah, so we're just trying to be careful because I think we're still learning about all this in the first year of this weirdness. So we got
Yeah.
to hang in there and we'll make it.
Yeah, and welcome back to the United States. You're in
Yeah, thank
Japan.
you.
You were in Japan for a little bit. How's Japan right now?
I was in Japan for 6 months to shoot 3 weeks, which seems extraordinary. Japan is locked down right now. They, they're a mask wearing culture.
Sure.
So wearing a mask is not a big deal to them. They don't really touch each other. 38 million people that live in a tight city, they figured out how to get along and follow the rules and distance each other. So, but their restaurants are open, stores are open, doors are open, masks are on. They do fogging, or they actually, sort of, it's actually dry, so they humidify, but they do it in a way that actually might be helping the virus. But
Yeah.
anyway, they're
Interesting.
trying to figure it out, and they got to figure it out if they want the Olympics this summer. So
Yeah.
they're
So
motivated.
you say you're there 6 months to shoot 3 weeks. What does that look like? What does that mean?
Well, in the entertainment business, that's a really odd amount of time. Part of that's a different culture where they're a consensus, they do things together. You're trying to understand what they're talking about, and every conversation is 2x or 3x longer than what you'd expect.
Hmm.
Um, and they just think differently. The movie business, television business is not respected over there. Filming over there is just a step above a petty crime. No one really
Really?
cares. They don't care because they don't see the value of that as adding value into the culture. We had to explain that in a big meeting to the governor of Tokyo that, when we come and spend 50, $60 million, that reverberates through the economy 3 or 4 times that amount because we pay people and they buy food, we buy lumber, we do hotel rooms, we buy meals, we buy taxis. All that stuff reverberates through the economy, and they just don't look at it that way. So
Yeah.
because their movie business makes $1 and $2 million movies, they don't make $200 million projects. So
Right.
they're getting used to it, they're understanding. um, but they got a particular way of doing things to survive and to make things work in that intense, dense city. So we had to learn their way and try to get what we need to make a television series that'll have a global appeal. And our
Right.
storytelling systems are different, as you know. Uh, we go about it in a little different way. So lots of challenges. I'm going to write about it. Um, Now that all sort of the hysteria is worn down a little bit, but I'm going to write about uh, how to do it, how to shoot in Japan in a positive way that, you know, but also in a constructive way to say, here's the things to look for, and here's the things that you need to be aware of
Right.
um, if you want to make stories with a background in a world very different. I mean, it's funny. They're very quiet people, very polite, soft spoken. When you go into the red light district, Kabukicho, which is a little more risque, and the cacophony of sound and lights is overwhelming. So
Mm.
there's these sort of opposites in the culture that are baffling. Um, so anyway, you know, great experience. Uh, Took a lot longer to prep for 3 weeks of shooting than we ever thought.
Right.
Um, but I was fortunate to be there and experience that. So hey, we chalk it up and move on and add it to the list of experiences.
Yeah, I've been obviously like a lot of people in this COVID time, I've been consuming a lot of media. And obviously with theaters shut down and everything, I've been consuming it from my living room.
Yeah.
Do you think this COVID period has changed the industry, or is it just sped it up to where it was going anyway? What is your take on what's happening right now?
I think in general, the cracks in our business, the cracks and fractures in our culture and society that were always there have been accentuated and pressurized, and stuff that we thought might take 5 years to change how movies are distributed has now been compressed into 8 months, 9 months, 10 months.
Yeah.
So, how a movie is experienced has changed. I don't think movie theaters are going away. I think they're resilient. I think human beings want to gather and be together in a dark room and experience and be inspired for 2 hours.
And you can't replicate that popcorn.
No, nor pay for it, right? Doesn't cost that much at home. Um, but yeah, and at home you can be distracted to go to the bathroom, push pause, answer the
Yeah.
phone, do whatever. In the movie theater, it goes on without you. In the Broadway theater, it goes on without you.
Yeah.
So uh, there's an urgency and a focus to that that is useful and I think something we crave. So I don't think it's going to go away, but it has changed. And I think filmmakers, we're all searching for, okay, what do we want to see in COVID? How do we make it with the safety protocols, which are really difficult to keep
Right.
actors and the director safe? Um, and how do we consume it? In some ways, I've got a lot of different services. I have Apple and Disney and Paramount, CBS, or whatever it is, and Netflix and Amazon, all those things. It's an overwhelming set of choices.
Yeah.
Um, and for me, as we approach the Academy Awards season, it's even more overwhelming. If it's not DVDs, which are going away, this will be the last year of DVDs for us as Academy members.
Hmm.
The barrage. I mean, I might get 50 emails a day about various movies that I should watch for the film selection from Hungary that I need to watch, or from Japan, or for whatever, as well as
Right.
the new Tom Hanks thing. And then we're going to have a discussion with Tom Hanks and the director, and you should be a part of that. Sign up, RSVP here, and use this
Right.
platform. I mean, it's overwhelming. So for the average movie viewer, yeah, you can go to Netflix or Apple, but at a certain point, you run out of things that are interesting. And what do I watch? Without movie theaters, I don't think we have a lot of that water cooler talk at the office to say,
Yeah.
hey, did you see Minari? Did you see this movie, that movie?
Right.
Um, and build that talk, that social viral media talk. Maybe if you're on Twitter or Facebook or read various newspapers, it might be the only way you're going to tell, hey, what's important? What should I watch? What's good?
Right. Is
Um,
it good and bad though, in the sense that one, there's probably too much content, but then also it's giving scripts, it's giving directors, it's giving producers a chance who otherwise wouldn't have.
no, I think the opportunity is as great as it's ever been
Yeah.
for filmmakers, storytellers to present and be in front of an audience. I mean, I was knocked out with Amanda Gorman at the inaugural, the U.S. Poet Laureate. That was
Incredible.
like watch. That was like watching church. That was like being in church. The
Yeah.
whole experience of doing that and seeing her performance and words um, was exciting and energizing. that, she's going to run the world. She's 22 years old. What was I
Yeah.
doing at 22?
Yeah.
Um, I wasn't writing poetry, I'll tell you that, but
Yeah.
I should have been, and should have been reading poetry. I want to read poetry now. Um, so yeah, I think this is a golden time for particularly non-white people to have a moment to put yourself out there.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that's fair and right and good, and let the best, bubble to the top. I think that's great.
Are we going to continue to go towards these long form 10 episode series types of formats? Is there still room for the hour and a half movie? Do people want to consume the longer form?
There will always be room. There will always be an audience for a 2 hour journey on a movie, to go to another world and experience a hero's journey. I think that's always going to be part of our culture. That's not going away. Um, the the longer form 8 episode, television allows you to go deeper in the character, and it's a mind meld between traditional television and feature films. Um, so Game of Thrones would have been a good movie, but it's a great series because you get more in depth with those characters. So
Yeah.
it's a little mashup of the two. Um, that's the flavor of the week right now. In the '80s, it was the same way with miniseries. It comes and goes. Right now, the audience is okay, binging, you know, 8 episodes of their favorite miniseries,
Yeah.
high profile. So, and there's a crossover of feature actors and TV actors back and forth, and I think that's all a good thing. It's a,
Yeah.
how, let's package it the way the audience, wants to experience it. And if 8 episodes, 10 episodes of The Crown puts you into the royal family in a deeper way, and the intrigue, and you're willing to sit through the sort of characterizations and small rooms and things like that, I don't know if you could last through 10 episodes of pure action. That might
Right.
that might be too much.
Right.
But character drives that stuff, and some stories you want to go deeper. You want to experience, hey, what was really going on in the royals' minds? What was really going on? And would Gladiator work as a series? It could have, maybe. Would you want to see Russell Crowe for 8 separate hours about how he struggled to become a general? You look back at like Ben Hur. Ben Hur was 2.5 hours, so it
Right.
wasn't quite a miniseries, but that was a really long with an intermission movie.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it really depends on the story, and if you have the value in the story that an audience wants to experience. That's what
What
it's about.
about the technical quality? I mean, I've watched a lot of things recently, especially on HBO, things like Watchmen, Lovecraft Country, where I watch it and I go, maybe you have a different eye for it, but I watch it and go, this is of the quality of a major motion picture. TV has kind of bridged the gap from what it used to be. You used to go to the movies and see things that you weren't seeing on TV sitcoms or TV shows. Now it feels like they've kind of bridged the gap in the quality. Do you sense that, or do you still see a difference between something like Tenant, something like a big motion picture, and what's coming out on streaming services?
Sometimes that's the filmmaker for me. So, when you have a filmmaker, I just worked with Michael Mann, who's a big, world class filmmaker, very technical, very, all the detail is there that, he chooses the wardrobe, the color, the texture of the dancers in the background, the deep background video. Technical filmmakers like that are going to deliver that in television or in features. It's not about whether or not
Hmm.
the format it's going to show. They're just, that's who they are as filmmakers. That's what they're going to do.
Sure.
Um, but I think the audience also demands more detail. The audience is demanding more authenticity, realism. Um, I think also as we future proof and shoot everything in 4K, that demands that you got to be correct in the makeup and hair, because we can go frame by frame back and forth. We can blow it up. We can look at it, and the audience will do that. So I think the standards have been raised by the audience, as well as you have filmmakers who are bringing the same skill set to television and the big screen, and there's not much difference.
Yeah. And same with the actors. I mean, there's actors taking roles in TV that usually, I mean, it wasn't long ago that that would never happen.
But you get more screen time in TV. You might only get 10 minutes on a 2-hour movie, but you might have your own episode in a
Yeah.
television high profile piece. So, actors, get into that because it's more material. It's a chance for them to show their skill set and shine. And why not?
Yeah. I want to talk about your background a little bit. When did you know that movies were a thing for you? Do you have like early childhood memories of movies, or was that something that came later for you?
No, that came later. I mean, as a kid, I remember sliding up to the wearing out a hole in the rug in the living room of my parents' house to see, the wonderful world of Disney, or to watch a Star Trek or Gunsmoke, or um, some comedy, whatever it was. Television was captivating, but as a kid watching a Star Trek episode, I never dreamed that I would be having dinner with Bill Shatner and Leonard Nimoy working on
Yeah.
a movie with them. It was just not that just never entered my mind. Um, I think that even when I got into the business, I started making industrial videos for a department store, and then I got into Paramount post production, and then I left to go on my own. Even on my own, it took a couple of projects before I really felt like, this is a career. This is something that could last. This is
Mm.
something we could keep doing. Judy, my wife, was working as a nurse. And so when I was off, she would work weekends and I would babysit. And we sort of traded off to sort of make ends meet, because we weren't sure of what this meant. Originally, I was going to go back to school. I was going to teach or become a pastor or do something else. So it was still an experimentation, probably until I was, you know, almost 30, to sort of figure out 30, 34, to figure out, hey, this is a career choice and I'm now going to commit to it. Probably 34 with Star Trek 4 in 86.
Hmm.
I'm going to commit to this and keep going because there's a career here and I can do well at this.
Yeah, you've been part of two huge franchises in Star Trek and in X-Men.
Yeah.
What is it like being part of those franchises when it comes to the fandom that comes around that? Is that a fun thing to be part of?
In Star Trek pre-email, we'd get fan letters, and it was good news and bad news. It was on Star Trek 2, it was you can't kill Spock. And the lesson we learned was you can if you do it right and you
Yeah,
bring him back.
you got to bring them
Uh,
back.
you can't blow up the Enterprise in Star Trek 3. Well, you can if you bring back a newer ship and it's better and all that. I
Right.
do remember we even got fan mail, weirdness. We got somebody who sent a Polaroid several times saying that Captain Kirk guy is not the real guy. I'm the real Captain Kirk. And he sent a picture of himself with in a Star Trek uniform with a gun in the Polaroid pointed at the camera. And it was terrifying. So we went to Paramount Security and we gave him the photo and said, watch out for a guy. Don't let a guy like this in. 2 weeks later, you know, it's typical. The guy shows up at the gate over to come to my office, and his picture's on the wall, and they go, "Oh yeah, we know you. Come on in."
No.
So, so he came in, and fortunately, he knocked on the door of my. I wasn't in the office, but my assistant was there. He knocked on the door, and he said his name, and the assistant had that name in her head, went and locked the door and called security. She was terrified.
No way.
But, you know, uh, the fans, yeah, I don't think it was actually going to hurt anybody, but the fact that, those fans, and I went to some fan conventions and spoke, well meaning, certainly you can understand Shatner's famous line about get a life, but
Right.
the appetite of the audience that wants to go to another world and wants to experience that and be a part of that is not just about people that are lonely. It's people about wanting and hopeful about Star Trek and that philosophy. X-Men was the same. I would generally, on every movie on opening night, go with the director, get a limo. We'd go to 5 or 6 theaters. We'd step in and look around and talk to people. And I remember on the Wolverine Origins with Gavin Hood, we went to a theater on the west side. And as we were walking out, some kids recognized us and came up, and they were all in costume.
Mm,
They were all in costume. They had dressed up as all the characters as Wolverine, and they'd used, chopsticks for their claws and all sorts of weird stuff, but they were having fun.
right.
And all of those fans in all those places have done that cosplay before we called it that. From the second Star Trek movie in 82, they were dressed up in line. They dressed up in line in 1982 for a preview in Kansas City in the wardrobe that we had never shown anyone.
No.
Somehow they figured it out and they got photos or something, and they dressed up like the new uniforms in line for a preview months before the picture came out.
That's awesome.
And yeah, you got to love that. You got to love that fans are intense about that, and have a love and a passion for it. And generally, those they're good people. They're passionate, they're interested, and so you want to feed that. You want to pay attention to that. I've always said, in making franchise movies, you got to pay attention to that bullseye. You got to pay attention to that core audience right at the center. Now, you can't make the movie just for them, because can't spend $100 million making it for 15,000 people, but you got to pay attention to them. So even in the first X-Men, we make a joke about that when they actually do put on uniforms at the end of the movie. Um, Wolverine says, "What are you talking about? Well, uniform? What's this about?" And he said, "What were you expecting? Yellow spandex?" Because that's exactly what the core audience wanted. They wanted
Right.
Wolverine to wear yellow spandex because that's what the comic books had. So,
Right.
you throw that back in a fun and a wink back at the core audience, and they appreciate that, and they go, they're listening. Somebody heard
Right.
me. And
Right.
so, there's a even stronger connection when you do that.
Yeah. Uh, I want to talk about faith-based films. You've been
Okay. Terrifying.
involved. You've been involved in a couple. You can talk about them if you'd like. I won't bring them up. What is the current state of faith-based films for you before I give my opinion of them?
Well, I've had my experience of trying to either take stories from the Bible, or um, what the Bible says about certain things, and put that on screen, or writers like Frank Peretti, Ted Decker, and take some of their stories and put them on screen. And everybody says they want good entertainment, etc., but between the lines, what they really want is they want to hear the right words in the right order.
Hmm.
And even the last movie that I made that was sort of a faith friendly movie, Captive, which is what Rick Warren said is the definitive story of The Purpose Driven Life, which sold 75 million copies, story of
Right.
Ashley Smith. And we had, David Oyelowo starring in it, and Kate Mara. Um, but we didn't play it out to the explicit expectations of a Christian audience, and they
Huh.
rejected it. And so uh, I think it's a tricky audience. I think there's a business there. There's certainly some of my friends, like the Kendrick brothers, um, in the South, make movies for that audience to encourage them. Um, And I love that. Not my interest, but I love what they're doing. They're getting better at it. But in general, I kind of, when somebody says they have a faith-based project and they want me to produce it or get involved, my first instinct is to back away a little bit, because I think that's trickier to do than you think.
Yeah. Are you someone in your theology, personal theology, are you someone who sees God in other faith-based works?
Look, I think that we serve a creator who presents himself in many ways. And whether you subscribe or whether you say you are saved by the blood of Christ doesn't necessarily mean you don't speak the truth about what is God's truth.
Mm,
So when I look at, in particular for movies and television, when I look at those works of art, I look at them to find out what is the filmmaker storyteller talking about, and does that truth line up with what you and I believe in the Bible?
yeah.
And to me, that's what's important, so that you may not think that Les Mis is a Christian movie, yet I look at the source material of Victor Hugo, and I look at the execution, and I look at the redemption that happens in the storytelling of Jean Valjean, and say, that's the story of a man becoming a Christian.
Mm,
And so it doesn't play out in a way that people say the right words in the right order, that I've been saved by the blood of Jesus Christ and I'm saved and I'm going to heaven. But I don't know if that narrowness of having to say the right words in the right order is necessarily the definition of what it means to be a follower of Christ or a child of God.
yeah. No, I
So
agree completely.
I might draw the lines out a little wider than you do, or wider than Dave Roberts might. But on the other hand, I see Jesus as being very inclusive and very, open to people that have a spark
Yeah.
that connects them to the eternity.
Yeah, no, I think my lines are just as wide, if not wider, than what you're describing. Uh, I've gotten to a point where, you know, I have to believe that Christianity doesn't have a monopoly on truth. That's ridiculous. There's evidence all over the place that that's not the truth.
Right.
And so then, for me, when I really started to see it was through musical theater, which, I'm a huge fan of.
Yeah.
And I started realizing, I'm weeping during these performances because I'm connecting to a deep, profound truth of what is being presented on the stage. And then you look up the writers and it's a Jewish guy or an atheist or and I started going, why am I connecting so deeply on what I perceive as a spiritual level to these people when we're supposed to be at odds? I grew up with the belief that they were others, that they were outside of what I was doing. How am I connecting? And really that's the evidence that there is no God, or that there's the evidence that there is a God connecting us
But
all, however you want to
yeah,
look at it.
that's the narrowness of how we were brought up and how we were taught. And, we each have to figure out and learn, you know, what the truth is. And so, yeah, when you experience more emotion watching The Lion King than when you do watching Aslan, something's up. Something should trigger with you about the storytelling, about the impact and the appeal of who those characters are.
Yeah. Yeah. What is your faith background? How did you grow up? What does that look like for you?
I grew up in the Presbyterian church. My family actually was part of a four square church downtown Los Angeles, um, more of a black church. I think my parents, in a good natured way, wanted me to more relate to kids in my neighborhood. Um, but I grew up in a Presbyterian, background, and in high school, at 12, I committed my life to Christ of what I knew at that point, and got involved in youth ministry and uh, leadership and all of that in my high school, college years, and rededicated my life as a high school kid. And it was good. It was all good experience. I didn't have any bad experiences. That was all useful and helpful and instructive. And unlike today, I've built up an enormous gas tank of scripture and Bible study, that sometimes when I'm not refilling that tank, I have plenty to, you know, live off of, because
Mm,
I got a great education, um, on the whole Bible, from those years. So, and I learned a little about stage and theater, and did some stuff, with youth productions and singing and production and drama that I think are useful and helpful to me today, as a producer and a leader. But yeah, I mean, it was more of a traditional Presbyterian evangelical theology,
yeah.
and I don't say that I haven't abandoned that, but I think it's changed for me. I think mainstream churches, um, I got involved so much in the politics in the Presbyterian church that I had to step away from that.
Mm,
And, I love where we are now in a neighborhood church, a Nazarene church, and it's simple, a simple gospel message. It reaches out to the neighbors that are nearby, and, the friendliest place, that I've been in a long time. I go to a lot of churches around the world. I
yeah.
haven't worked in the US in 20 years, and I try out churches where I go, and people say they're friendly. I'll tell you who's friendly. How do you ignore a 6'4" geek walking in the back of the room? And you'd be surprised how many churches do.
Yeah.
And the church we attend is the friendliest place that I've ever been, and it's a place of love and acceptance, and that's kind of what matters.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Has your career and your faith ever been at odds in your journey?
Yeah, they have, and not what you'd expect. It's not because somebody wants me to say a bad word or to take my clothes off. Nobody wants to see a producer without his clothes, by the way. But it's more about the material, more about the story. I've turned down stories because they're bad stories, not because they're unchristian.
Right.
Um, and stories that I have been involved with, you know, be it Hocus Pocus, and being a part of the discussion creatively about whether we should include scenes about white witches, or in X-Men, I was glad to be a part of a discussion with Ian McKellen where we had a scene where, Magneto was going to shoot a cop, and I was able to interact with the actor and the director and change the script so that, that kind of action, the magnification of that in a big franchise movie would have been disastrous. We don't do that. That's not what we espouse. We don't believe that. Why would we show that? And so sometimes it's, you got to be able to be in the conversation and be part of it. What Lin Manuel, be in the room where it happens.
Yeah.
That's part of being in the world and being a voice and being not afraid to speak up when it's appropriate. But I argue with the head of the studio at Fox about whether we should have have Wolverine utter the F word 3 or 4 times, and I dealt with him not because that the Bible wouldn't like you to do that, but rather it's a business decision. Why would you make this an R-rated movie instead of a PG-13 movie? Make it a
Right.
business decision. Why would you cut out that audience? Why
Right.
would you why would you piss them off? Why would you do that?
Right.
And some of that is just, you know, being smart about it and being in the right place, and being able to have a voice because you do excellent work. I think you gain that opportunity to have that conversation, if you are adding value to the project and you have earned, that
Yeah.
position.
That's a really interesting Magneto story. I mean, we often give actors a really hard time for using, award ceremonies to get up and talk about their agendas or whatever. But do you experience those things to be true when they're on set? When there are actors worried about the things they believe in on set? Is that something that
No,
you've come across a lot?
no, you've worked through that ahead of time. You work through that with the director and the script. If you've got a problem and you don't bring it up until the time you're shooting, you're an
Hmm.
idiot.
Right.
You
But
bring
they
that
but
up.
they will bring it up. It does actually matter to them sometimes.
Well, again, the reason to be the best possible storyteller in your work, in whatever position you are, is what served me well in that discussion with Ian McKellen and Brian Singer.
Mm.
You know, and I wasn't trying to talk them into anything. I'm just asking questions about the impact of that choice and what that would look like. And they made the decision. Brian made the decision,
Hmm.
but it was obvious by the time we'd gone through the conversation and asked the questions.
Right,
So,
right.
and that didn't happen on the day. That happened ahead of time. That happened in the preparation for those scenes, because when the change in the script came out, I went to Brian. I went to Ian McKellen directly, because I went to Brian first and he didn't want to do it. He said, no, no, that's what
Mm.
we're going to do. So I went around him and I went to the actor and I appealed to the actor directly and saying, you're going to be the one known as the one who pulled the trigger on this. Is that something you want to live with and be known? So I was cheating,
Right,
but
right.
for me, I felt like I was cheating for the right reasons. And and Ian saw it. Ian said, yeah, you're right. And he went back to Brian and together we decided, you know, this isn't what we would do. So,
Yeah.
you know,
It just blows my mind that you had a conversation with Ian McKellen, let alone that you're
oh yeah,
working with him. That's such a cool thing, man.
he's Ian's a great guy, and we had a great time together, and he's still a friend. I've seen him before. When I go to London, I see him, or once in a while when
Right.
he comes to LA. But he's a good guy.
Is there a story um that has a not necessarily a faith aspect to it, but a truth in it that you haven't been able to tell that, before your time is said and done, you really want to tell this story?
Um, Look, I think there's stories about. I think the stories about the Bible and Bible characters are the hardest ones to do. I don't think it's a I don't think it's by chance that Mel Gibson waits till later in his career to make The Passion.
Mm,
I think to do it and do it right takes all of your skill set, to do it in a way that's faithful, in a way that's thoughtful, in a way that interprets the text for today's audience.
yeah.
So if I had the opportunity while working, I'd love to embark on a large scale storytelling about King David, the center of the Bible, and the
Yeah.
stories that he goes through and why he's a hero and why he's been revered for so many years.
But that's not a
And
PG story.
it's not a PG story. That's an R-rated story.
Yeah.
Um, from the way he deals with not just Bathsheba, but the way he deals with his enemies. Um, he didn't just go ask for 10,000 foreskins. The way he deals with his son um, and family, but it's a story of a flawed character, but it's a character that God blesses and sees as someone that he loves. And it's like,
Yeah.
how do I see myself in that character? That's what
Hmm.
I would hope a big epic gladiator-esque production would show. Um, I spent many years trying to tell the story or trying to attack some of the stories of Screw Tape Letters. I think that window may have passed. It may come back. I do think that's interesting as well, which is to look through the other end of the telescope and look back the other way and say, what's important? How do we view this? What are the subtle nuances of how we go astray and why?
Yeah.
Um, so, yeah, I'd say probably those two things would be, at least in a faith perspective, would be interesting and fun to engage. We have I've got a bunch of projects that are sort of dormant. We've David Franzoni, who wrote and produced Gladiator and got an Oscar for it. We employed him to write a sequel to Gladiator, which is really about Constantine, the emperor, who never
Hmm.
lost a battle as a general, a Roman general, and became a Christian on his deathbed and changed the face of history for 1,000 years. Who's that guy? I want to
Yeah.
know about him. I think that would be, and we have the screenplay for that one. I think that would be, pretty fantastic. I'm a fan of the Question in the Butch and Sundance Kid movie. You know, when they're constantly being, after they rob a bank and they're followed all over. Butch keeps asking, "Who are those guys?
Yeah.
Who are those guys?" I think that's the question people should be asking about us as Christians, because they don't quite understand how they treat people or why, or in a good way, not in a butch way, but how do they, who are those guys?
Yeah.
That's the question people should be asking about us as people who follow Christ.
Yeah. I think right now, a lot of people look at Christianity and go, "Who are those guys?" in a
Well,
negative
today in our
sense.
culture, today, yeah, today in our
how
culture, yeah, it's horrible.
how do you how do you see modern Christianity playing out right now? The good and the bad, I suppose.
I think in the last 4 years, evangelical Christianity is burned to the ground,
Hmm.
burnt to the ground, lost all credibility, every single bit of it. um, because the double and triple standards of what we believe and say we believe, and the ethics and how we treat people, has been trampled on, even by people like Franklin Graham, to say that he supports, what that previous president
Yeah.
was doing.
I would say
So,
especially like people like Franklin Graham.
yeah. So I think everything's burnt to the ground and we need new rules. We need to figure out, how do we get back to authentic biblical Christianity? How do we get back to objective truth?
Yeah.
Um, all those things are critical, um, if we're going to move forward, because I think the church has lost all its credibility. It didn't speak out. It didn't speak out forcefully. We have a screenplay that we're working on, the story of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and it's
Mm.
incredibly timely. Of Bonhoeffer gave his life to speak out against what Hitler was doing,
Yeah.
and I just don't see that in the church today. The same kind of passion or fire about doing that. Um, Maybe in the Black community they do that because they are giving their lives,
Yeah.
um, but in general, the traditional, you know evangelical Christianity, I believe, is burnt to the ground. It's over.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm working on a poem, that I'm one for poetry. And the title of the poem is I Had a Name. And it's just that when I was younger, calling myself a Christian was simple and it was easy and I loved it and I embraced it. And now I don't even really know what that means anymore. And part
Mm,
of that is just you grow up and you experience more and you see more. But a lot of it is just what the church has become, especially in the United States, like you said, over the last 4 years, probably even predating that.
longer. Yeah.
But just you can't hold up the church's values right now and the life of
No.
Jesus
No.
and find comparisons. The way that Jesus lived was completely different. He didn't create an empire. He purposefully, radically did not create an empire when he could have. The temptations of Jesus in the desert was all about, here you go, establish yourself as the ruler, you'll create your empire, you'll have complete control. And he literally refused to do that. But here we are trying to create an empire, trying to take political control, as if that's going to bring people to Christ. And it's not biblical. It's not about Jesus. And it's like you said, it's burning it to the ground. I absolutely agree.
I don't know that you can have a civil discussion with someone who supports what Trump believes just because they got their judges or they got the rulings that they wanted. Really? Is that the price you're willing to pay? Really? Is that the legacy you want? I think history, again, from Lin Manuel Miranda, you know, history's watching. History will tell of what happens. I don't know that I'll be alive to sort of enjoy what the analysis is of this
Hmm.
time in our lives, but um, I don't think it'll look kindly on the last 4 years in politics.
Hmm.
And the deeper issues that I think are about racism and all of that are much longer in the much deeper in our culture, been going on much longer. Some people say the alt-right movement really began even more in earnest when Barack Obama was elected,
Right.
because it was like, well, how did that happen? How
Right.
did that get by us? Um, and the only hope is that that white majority will die out, because uh, that's just nothing about what we believe as Christians, nor is it what we believe as Americans, nor is it what we believe of what the Constitution has put forth. So uh, I have a real problem with my Christian friends who stand on the right and want to defend that guy. And it's really hard to speak to them, really
Right.
hard.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so deeply ingrained.
Yeah.
There's a moment where Jesus is in front of Herod, and Herod says, "Oh, so you're a king or something?" And he goes, "No, if I was here to take over, my people would have already done that. My kingdom is not of this world." And it's like the most badass Jesus moment that there is.
Yeah.
And it was
Yeah.
radical,
That's right.
and like I think back to that moment all the time. And you know, I almost I don't want political control. I don't want to be in the majority. I want to I want to be able to live and show people love and joy and peace and all these things that are biblical truths by living, not by having any kind of control or majority voice or anything like that. It seems like that's the example of how the that message and the word of God thrived in the early church. And I get so uncomfortable on the
Yeah.
other end of that.
It was a guerrilla movement. And that lower key, under the radar, who are those guys, is a much better approach to changing lives and affecting change without trying to, you know, rally the troops in the capital.
I mean, Paul literally wrote letters from prison, and none of the letters say, "Can you guys get me out of prison?"
Yeah,
Not one of them.
that's
Not
cool.
one
That's
of
right.
them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's
And I
right.
think that's awesome. I love that example. Ralph, I appreciate you doing this, man. I know you've given me a ton of advice over the years, and I've appreciated and loved it so much. Somebody listening who values your opinion and wants to be a writer, wants to be a producer, what's the number one thing, the number one piece of advice you would give people?
If you want to be a writer, I think you got to find stories that move you and that have value. Don't write anything that isn't going to change your life.
Hmm.
Why would you spend all that time writing and working over something unless it was about changing you? And I think that if you want to be a producer, I think you have to recognize that there are no bad stories. No matter what you do, your mom will love what you do, no matter what. But
Absolutely.
but there's a limited number of stories that the audience will pay for. Knowing the difference is what makes you a producer. You
Hmm.
gotta you gotta figure out what an audience will pay for or accept or want more of if you want to make it a business. And so I would say you got to learn to distinguish those two. But if you want to write something that's going to change your life. Why do you think, If you what you're writing doesn't make you laugh, why is the audience going to laugh?
Mm,
If what you're writing doesn't make you cry, why should anyone else cry? If it doesn't move you, why is it going to move anyone else? Write something that'll change your life. That's what I would say.
awesome. Ralph, I appreciate you taking the time. Love you, man. And I appreciate you very much.
Cool. Much love back. Thank you.